All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Tim McCurdy, and I'm an elder law attorney with Mitchell Brown and Associates in Kirkwood. So, as an elder law attorney, we serve the senior population to help them with benefit planning, estate planning, but also, unfortunately, we help them when they are or their families are dealing with issues and concerns about exploitation, especially of seniors. So it's something, well, I'll be sharing some information about types of exploitation that occur and tips of things that people can do to protect themselves and their loved ones. But also, too, we want this to be as useful as possible. So if you have any questions or experiences you want to share, feel free to just raise your hand during the presentation, and happy to proceed that way. Senior exploitation has been called the crime of the 21st century. As our population ages and as there are more and more ways that people can be contacted, anonymously or reached out to, we see the rate of senior exploitation is just growing rapidly. And it's considered the illegal use of an older adult's funds or property. So that can include theft or fraud or the use of undue influence over a senior. And with that, there's an estimated 1.5 million seniors are victims of fraud. And if you convert that into a dollars and cents number, that's $2.9 billion worth of lost savings of seniors, and that, something they've saved their entire lives for that they lose through some type of exploitation. And while that's a staggering number, the scariest part is that's only what we know about. It's estimated that for every reported case of elder financial exploitation, 43 cases go unrecognized. And, that can be because, the senior isn't aware that it's happened, or maybe they don't want to come forward and admit that it's happened. For a lot of reasons, what we know about is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to senior exploitation. So today we're going to talk about, well, who's at risk of this type of exploitation? And who are the perpetrators? Who are the ones behind this? What are the types of financial exploitation? And also, what can you do to help protect your loved ones to make sure, help them try to avoid becoming a victim of this? When we talk about who's at risk, as I mentioned, it's something where the risk increases as we age. Nearly half of all victims of exploitation are 80 years old or older. It's also something where your risk of exploitation increases the more that you're isolated. So if, we'll talk about if you have a loved one who's living by themselves and, you've got concerns, that's someone who's really at risk of this type of exploitation. Also, according to the Department of Health and Senior Services, the typical victim of financial exploitation is female at 64%, which I think partly is just because as you get to that older age, it's more predominantly female that, women tend to live longer. As I mentioned, that they're isolated. The typical victim of financial exploitation may suffer from some form of dementia or impairment, which is something naturally we see more as we get into our mid-late 80s. And they may be reluctant to admit that this happened. One of the reasons that we say, only a small part of financial exploitation gets reported is because the senior may not want to admit it. And oftentimes that's because it's the loved one who's the one who is the one doing the exploitation. Or they may be afraid to report the abuse. It could be either because they're scared of that person, understandably, or it's because, as we get older, for many of us, one of the most important things we have is our independence. The fear that if I admit anything's going wrong, my family, with the best of intentions, may come in and limit my independence. But financial exploitation can happen to anyone. We're focused here today on the risk for seniors, but we're all at risk of some form of financial exploitation. In terms of who are the perpetrators of abuse, with individuals, it can be someone unknown to the senior, healthcare professionals, caregivers, landlords, neighbors, in-home caregivers. But if we look at this chart in terms of the majority, 59.4% are relatives. So unfortunately, when we are at a point in our lives where we are really depending upon our family, and it's oftentimes you see this where it's the mom or the dad who've spent their lives taking care of their kids, and now it's okay, it's the kids' turn to take care of them. Unfortunately, that can put them at risk of exploitation. Adult children account for 60.4% of substantiated financial exploitation cases by relatives. Common forms of exploitation by relatives are depleting joint checking accounts. It's something where, as estate planners, we shudder with joint checking accounts. Now, it's something that a lot of people do, and it works for some people. They say, well, talk about a senior wanting to help maintain independence. Maybe they need some help paying the bills. It's easy just to put a son or a daughter or their name on the checking account so they can help pay the bills. You always have to remember that you're not putting someone's name on the account. You're giving that account to that person. Because if my name is on your checking account, that's my money. It doesn't matter if I put in a penny into that account. I can write checks out of that account just like you can. So it can be something where the senior has no idea that's happening in terms of, oh, their name's on there, but I don't look at the statements, or gee, I haven't gotten my statement in a long time. I wonder why that is. And all of a sudden the money's cleaned out. Or promising but not delivering care in exchange for money. A lot of times that'll be the explanation is, well, I used mom's money to pay for this or that, but that's because I'm helping her. I'm taking care of her. When you say, okay, what are you actually doing? And there's really not much. Or just outright theft, of just straight out stealing from the senior. There's also a concern for exploitation by relatives or caregivers. As you're trying to maintain your independence but relying on someone to provide in-home care, they've got access to your home, they've got access to your papers and what have you. Are they committing identity theft or accessing your funds? So it can be difficult to detect because it often occurs in a private setting, and it happens in the senior's home. As I mentioned and really emphasize, it goes unreported because the victim may be embarrassed. I mean, who wants to come forward and admit that your son or your daughter is ripping you off? Or they're scared, in terms of, that caretaker who's coming in and providing care for me, I'm worried about, if I report that person. Or again, worried about losing independence. So it's something where, understandably, there are times where the senior isn't going to come forward and report any type of exploitation. So it's something for us, for the seniors in our lives, to be on the lookout for. What are some things that you can be on the lookout to say, well, is there something going on here? Do I need to look a little closer? And one would be if the senior suddenly appears confused or unkempt or afraid, something there's been a real change in demeanor. Another big red flag would be if all of a sudden, your loved one who has never missed a payment a day in their life, all of a sudden is having, I've got a misunderstanding with the utility company or something like that, where there are bills that are going unpaid, even though, as far as that person has the funds to pay for it. Or a big thing would be the caregiver or the child is trying to isolate the senior. That they won't let you have access. Hey, I'm here to see mom or something. Oh, she's not feeling well today. Okay, that's fine once or twice, but if that's a pattern of, hey, something's up here, you're stopping me from seeing the senior, then that can be a concern. So what can you do in those situations? What can you do to help protect a loved one? And again, mentioned with joint checking accounts. I completely understand why people do it, and the times where it works just fine, I don't hear about, because you don't have to call a lawyer and talk to them or those things. But always remember that, that person who's on that account, it's their money. They can do what they want with it. So you don't have any things to stop that person from doing whatever they want with that money. So there are, say, well, you still have this problem of, well, the senior still needs some help paying the bills. You need someone to help do that. They do have companies that you can hire to kind of take over the checkbook, say, hey, these are all my monthly bills. I make you an authorized signer on the account. You can do it. You got to pay a fee to do it, but you've got someone who's providing those services. They give an accounting of everything they spend. There's also financial powers of attorney. That is something where you are designating an agent to be able to manage your finances. So it still needs to be a trusted person. They still have, they're going to have access to control of your accounts. But the big thing is that there are some checks and balances on that person. They have now, it's not their money. It's still your money. They just have the ability to use it for your benefit. They're legally required to do it. Now, can they still clean out your account? Yes, they can. But at least the lawyer, you've got things you can do about it. You got steps you can take to protect yourself.
Is there such a thing as like on an account instead of putting a joint to do like in the event of death?
Yeah. So, and that's a good question in terms of if part of the reason for putting someone's name on the account is, well, what happens when I die? Where does those funds go? And you can absolutely do for a checking account, bank account, they call it a pay on death designation, which is just like, on your 401k, you've got your life insurance, you've got a beneficiary. This is where it goes when I pass. It's the exact same thing on a bank account. Or you can do it for a car. They call it a transfer on death. We're lawyers, so we can't just use one simple word. We got to give everything a different name. You can do that for your cars or, your house. You can do a benefit. There's all kinds of ways that if your goal of putting someone's name on the account is, well, I don't want it to be a hassle when I die. I don't want anybody to go to probate. This is how we can do it. Then there are absolutely better ways to do it than that. And, a lot of these don't even require a lawyer. The pay on death, you just go to the bank and say, hey, I need to do this. Where's the form to do it? The other thing that, the downside to the joint accounts, that even when there's no exploitation or anything that people don't think about, is that works great if you've got one daughter or one son. But if, I hear all the time of, oh, well, this is going to go to all three of my kids. And I say, well, I'm sure that's what you want, but your daughter's name is on the account. So when you die, that's your daughter's money. So, oh, my daughter will give it to them. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. And it's like, yeah, okay. Like I say, I'm sure that happens out fine, but I don't see those people. I see the ones who say, everything went to her and it was supposed to go to all three of us. That's what mom wanted. Say, well, that's nice, but that's not what's going to happen. So, and that's an example too of there are ways to accomplish the same goals, but you can do it that you're protecting the senior from these risks of exploitation. The other, yeah.
About the financial power of attorney. So, is there a way to put that in motion for when it's needed if you're not there yet?
Right.
So, like, my parent is perfectly capable, still works a full-time job, but at any point things could change and or, as time progresses. So, making those decisions now for like when that time comes?
Yeah, absolutely. So with a power of attorney, there are two basic types of power of attorney. There's one that the minute you sign it, it goes into effect, where even though you're mentally capable of signing it to say, this is what I want to do, the minute you sign it, that other person can now step in and take over your finances if they choose. That's something that we usually only do if you're naming your spouse, or very close, trusted, and even though there may be no real concerns about the other person, anytime you have two people managing an account, it can get complicated. But then there's also what we call a springing power of attorney. So the way to think about that is you put in the power of attorney that says, okay, when I need it, when a doctor says I'm incapacitated, I can't manage my finances anymore, that power of attorney is going to spring into effect, and then that person's going to be able to do all these things under the power of attorney. So that's, because that's something where one of the reasons people don't want to do the power of attorney is they say, I don't want to give up control. I don't want to have someone else accessing my accounts and everything. I only want a safety net if I need it. That's exactly a way to do it. And, it's something, the documents, it doesn't add a lot of complexity to it. It's a very similar type of thing, but to sign it. Now, one of the downsides to powers of attorney is that sometimes we run into issues with banks accepting them. Because one of the challenges with a power of attorney is it doesn't get filed with the court, which is a good thing. Keep it simple. But the way that you change it, the way that you change who your agent is, or the way you revoke it is just by doing another one. So when you show up at the bank and you say, well, here's my power of attorney, I want my daughter to be able to manage my account, the bank doesn't know, is this your only power of attorney? Do you got two other ones out there? Is somebody going to show up tomorrow saying, well, here's my other power of attorney? So that can be a real challenge. Or the bank says, well, we've got our own form. We like, all those things. So unfortunately, sometimes there's some extra hoops to go through. Sometimes you need the lawyers to talk to each other, all those things. So, life isn't simple, but it's a way to do that. Also, another example for the powers of attorney is you may be familiar with the healthcare power of attorney, where that's something, frankly, everyone needs, where it only goes into effect when you're incapacitated. Because that's the person who can talk to your doctors, make medical decisions, but it's only when you can't communicate. You can't give that power up to somebody while you're still able to do it yourself. So other things to avoid would be, don't sign blank checks. And you see that where people say, oh, it's just easier for me to fill out all the checks. And then, my daughter writes in the names and the amounts, that's open for abuse. And being careful about co-signing loans or guaranteeing loans. When you do that, that's your loan. You're responsible for paying it. And it can be a good idea to have a trusted friend or relative receive copies of monthly statements. Now, but that's a challenge, though, because remember that 60% of the abusers are friends of family. So, okay, well, I thought they were a trusted one. So, again, if you've got the answer to these things, I'm all ears. These are just kind of examples of things that you can do, but they're all going to be tied to having kind of the right situation. A good idea is kind of an audit by a financial planner. Sometimes if people work with a financial planner, they'll go in, once a year and sit down and say, how are we doing? Where are we at? And that's something where, that can be an opportunity to sit down with an objective third person who's looking over your finances saying, well, wait a minute, this is where you were a year ago. This is where you are now. Where'd the money go? Notifying a bank or financial institution. That can be, although I'll tell you, I deal with families where, the person who you think is doing the exploitation thinks they're the only ones who cares about mom. It's not just as simple when you accuse them and say, hey, you're ripping off mom. They don't fall on their knees and beg for forgiveness. They say, oh, no, I'm the one that's the good one here. So sometimes, it's be common. You can have different family members reporting to Edward Jones or someone saying, hey, there's something funny going on here. So the banks are usually pretty cautious. They're usually err on the side of freezing an account, making sure they've got a chance to look into things. So if you're concerned about something's happening right now, that's one option. And then also to give a trusted contact. That could be, notifying for the financial planner or the financial institution, hey, here's a person who, if you can't reach me, reach out to them. Or if they call with questions about the account, they're allowed to do it. Now, again, the challenge being, who you think is a trusted contact may not be. Now, things that we can do to help our loved ones, a big one is just always be checking in on your friends and family. Seniors who, living by themselves, it's great just to be able to check in on them, be a support for them, but also to be on the lookout for any signs of exploitation. And if you have concerns about that, you can contact an elder law attorney, primarily because that's someone who's focusing on the senior population. So they're going to be a little more familiar with unique concerns dealing with our aging population. Contact the Mideast Area Agency on Aging or the DHSS Adult Abuse and Neglect Hotline. Although candidly, I'll tell you that's something where that's, it's a good thing. People are aware of that. Say, I can hotline someone I can call. But with a lot of instances I see, and in fairness to the investigators, they kind of don't know when they're walking in and they've got two different sides of the story what to do. That doesn't always result in a lot of kind of going beyond that initial investigation. Also contacting Voice that serves to help provide services for seniors, and ultimately contacting the police. So these are all steps that you can take if you're concerned that a loved one is subject to exploitation. Now that's focusing a lot, as I mentioned, on the common scenario where it's a family member or a loved one who's involved. And then, of course, there are also scams by people who are completely unknown to the senior. So these all focus on either getting the senior to send money somehow, some way, or stealing the person's identity so then they can go, apply for credit cards and do these things, or both. And one of the scams that is something that I had never thought of or heard of until I started preparing this, but is actually surprisingly common, is something they call the grandparent scam, where the way that this would work would be, you can get call lists by age, by demographics. You just, these, scammers get a list of people who fit that age range of older, and then they just start calling, and they start calling, and they say, they'll hear, is it a man or a woman answer? And say a woman answers, well, hi, Grandma, do you know who this is? And they'll call 100 people, and 99 people will say no and hang up on them or something like that. And that one person catch them at the right time, and the voice sounds just right, and they say, well, is that Billy? They think, and then all of a sudden, the senior guesses the name of a grandchild, and then they've got it. Then off they go. And they say, oh, well, bad news, Grandma. There's this misunderstanding, and I got arrested, and I need bonded out of jail, or my car broke down, and I got to pay the repairman, or he's not going to let me have my car, or all these things. And then they ask for money by, Western Union or credit card info or things to do right away. So, the challenge for this is it's something where, it's any one of us, if we got that call, we would just hang up on them. Or, if you're like my teenage son, you'd play with them a little bit and then you'd hang up on them. But it's for those individuals who, are already at risk in terms of their circumstances. And they call that, but, it was, natural things to tell people would be, well, tell them you'll call them back, because if that is your grandchild, maybe you've got their phone number or something, or, check the story with the relatives. But, the hard part is it's something where if you're thinking about these things, you're probably not going to fall for it. It's just, the ones where you get caught up and, just trying to help a loved one, and then all of a sudden you've been the victim of a scam. The other big thing is the IRS imposter scam. I'm sure we've all gotten phone calls saying, this is the IRS, and you're in big trouble because any one of us hears IRS. All of a sudden you get a little nervous and they go, wait, kind of thing. And the caller ID shows up, Washington D.C. or IRS, and they'll say, the IRS can do all these things. They can garnish your checks. They can do all these things. But then it turns into, you have to pay, we can take care of this right now on the phone, wire me money, or, prepaid cash cards and all these things. Otherwise, you're going to be in a lot of trouble with the IRS. So it's something where if there's anything, to share with your loved ones and take from this is that the IRS does not call, and they don't email, they don't text message. They send you a letter first before they will, be contacting you. And also, for the IRS, they don't accept payment by prepaid debit cards or even a money transfer. They won't tell you how to pay. The IRS just wants to get paid. They don't care how they pay you. So again, it's one of those where the challenge is these are things that we hear and we get frustrated and say, oh, I can't believe this, and who falls for that kind of thing? But people do. Now, and again, what to do is hang up, and then I've on my own called a few times for the IRS saying, hey, I got this. And usually they say, oh, yeah, thanks. That's been reported to us, too. We're doing what we can. But it's one, with all of these, there are limits to what can be done about it, because how do you find the people who are doing it? Usually they're not even in the United States that are doing it to do anything about it. And with telephone scams, red flags to spot a telemarketing scam. You've been specially selected for this offer, or you have won one of 5 valuable prizes, and stay on the line, or you've won a foreign lottery, or this investment is low risk and provides a higher return than you can get anywhere else. Well, I'll tell you, I worked as a telemarketer one summer, and some of these things kind of sound like what we did on the phone. So it's hard, you know what they're like. They're doing sales. The big thing is always, rushing. You have to decide right away, or our company's well regarded. You don't need to Google us or anything, or you've won something. It's a gift or something. You just have to pay the shipping and handling. That's the only reason we need your credit card. So how to handle those unexpected sales calls. Telemarketers are required to tell you it is a sales call, their name and what they're selling before they get into their whole spiel. So if you don't hear that, say no thanks and hang up. Now it's hard too, because sometimes that number will pop up, but it'll pop up as a 314 number or a 636 number, because they've got ways to kind of direct it through a number that you might not have picked up if it had been an 888 number or something that you're even going to answer. But for all these, for the phone calls and for other types of concerns, they're always trying to rush you. They're always trying to get you to commit right away to get your money. So say, well, no, I want information in writing. And then always, ask if it's free, why are you asking me to pay you? If you have to pay to redeem a prize or a gift, it's not a prize or a gift. It's a purchase. Never send money or give personal information, and research companies online or with the Better Business Bureau. And the best way to handle unexpected calls is just to hang up, So it's something I'm sure we all do with unfortunate frequency. Now, there's also the donotcall.gov, which is the National Do Not Call Registry. Now, this will, help really cut down on unwanted calls. It won't completely stop them because they've passed laws to say that, we can limit when you're called to be sold things, but those laws were passed by politicians. So they accepted the calls from the politicians saying, hey, will you donate to my campaign? Because that's your important First Amendment rights and all those things. But it can be a way to limit on the unwanted calls. But as an example of how challenging it is because the people who are trying to take advantage of others are looking for these things, and they're always on. It's hard to keep up because they're always changing. There was actually a notice saying that people were calling to say your registration on the Do Not Call registry is about to expire. So you need to give us your information so that you don't get these calls. And the Do Not Call registry doesn't expire, and you don't get calls about it. That's the whole point. So they were turning something of where people thought they were doing the right thing to be safe and cut down on this risk of exploitation. It turned into a scam itself. And there are sweepstakes and lottery scams. You just won the lottery, but you have to pay to collect your winnings. And, unfortunately, they're ones where, the way to think about a lot of these scams is you say, well, everybody knows that's a scam, or, how are they going to do that? How does this even work for people? The way to think about it is if you get that phone call or if you get that email, you are one of hundreds, if not thousands of people who got the exact same thing. It's a numbers game for them. They know that, 90% of the people are going to hang up or delete the email or all that, but they just need those few who respond. They get their hooks in them, and then you're able to do that. I remember getting a call from a woman who was so upset and so frustrated with, I think it was Western Union she was mad at because they weren't letting her get her money. And I started walking her through and said, well, what's the problem? And I said, well, I've done everything. I've gone through all these steps and, but they won't release the money to me. And I said, well, who, ma'am? And she said, well, I don't even know how, but I inherited this money from this person in Nigeria. And I heard that and I thought, no way. People don't, really? And, and you're trying to be sympathetic. You don't want to say, oh, come on, and I'm asking her and I said, well, yeah, but then they said I had to do this and this. And I'm like, well, ma'am, how much money have you given them? She's quiet. She was embarrassed. She said, well, it's about $26,000. I'm like, oh my, your heart just broke for her. And the only thing I'd tell her was, go contact the police, go contact the FBI. I don't have anybody to sue. These people are probably in Eastern Europe somewhere or something. So it's one where, they just bombard people. For a lot of us, it's an annoyance. For some people, it can be devastating. So, of course, you should never need to pay money to collect winnings. As for confirmation in writing, there's also disaster-related charity fraud, where there can be the best of purposes. People are out promoting, saying, "Hey, there's been this natural disaster, and we're collecting charity or thing to help people. Naturally, we want to help." But then that turns into, when the scammers know there's people out there getting ready to make donations, they'll be out there contacting people trying to do that. So, unfortunately, it makes it hard if you're not one of the larger charities that are well known, to be out soliciting because people are rightfully cautious about that, or at least hope that they are. There's also for home improvement, door-to-door sales, and that can be anytime there's a storm that goes through and all of a sudden there's people knocking on doors saying, hey, I think you got hail damage, or, that kind of thing, where, there can be unscrupulous providers who are either maybe they're not bonded or, they're not going to do a good job, all the way up to individuals who recognize by going door to door and finding people that, oh, here's an isolated senior and someone who may be happy to have someone to talk to, and they invite them in, and then all of a sudden, they keep showing up to help with jobs, and their friend shows up, and all these things. And unfortunately, it happens. So things that you can encourage, both we should do, but encourage your loved ones to do. Ask for credentials, find out, are you bonded, all these different things. Perform your research, go online, look for Better Business Bureau recommendations. Never say yes to paying large amounts up front. We talked about before with email scams, there are 156 million scam emails sent each day. So the goal is to get your personal information or to make you pay. Give the example of, the Nigerian prince who says that, congratulations, you're an heir, you're about to get this money. We found as lawyers, I think some lawyers, you can be easy marks because we're not as good with the technology and things. You get somebody contacted saying, I want to hire you and I want your banking information. And the lawyer gets all excited. Hey, I got a client. And all of a sudden you think, well, wait a minute, why is someone in Hong Kong calling me out of the blue in St. Louis, Missouri? Or you get the notices that say, something to do with your Amazon account and all these. So it becomes kind of a game to have to look in the email for the little things that are a tip off to say, wait a minute, why is Amazon sending me an email from a Gmail account, or something like that? Or I would have thought Amazon didn't have all these typos or, that kind of thing. But some of them can be really good. Or the bad ones are the tech support scams, where all of a sudden you got something popping up saying, oh my goodness, my computer's been infected, it's about to crash. And the reality is that you've gotten an email that's gotten into your computer to try to get you to call. So with email scams, do not click on links or reply to suspicious emails. Never, don't send money, don't give your credit card number or control of your computer to anyone who contacts you. Look for grammatical errors, look for suspicious email accounts. Invest in antivirus software. And then, the same thing would be, well, how does this work? Does this really work for people? And give the example with this cartoon of why they work. First email says, enter your bank account number. The first person says scam. Second person says scam. Third person says, okay, and that's how, 156 million emails a day. It's also, too, to be thinking about your passwords. The most common passwords are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, QWERTY, which is just going across the keyboard, 111111, or my favorite, password. So something to be changing your password periodically. Now that can be a challenge because we've all had that too, where a password doesn't do you any good if you can't remember what it is. So if I've got 30 different passwords and I don't remember which one is this one, that can be really frustrating, but it's also a way to protect yourself. And I'm guilty of this, using the same password for all the accounts. Once somebody gets one password, they can get into all other things. At least 8 characters, although you'll see that it's increasing now. Now they're asking for 12, 14 passwords, and that's when, or use uppercase, lowercase, all these things that websites are increasingly expecting you to do. Now, there's also they've got different password vaults or password generators where you can do those. So those, you always get nervous that you're going to get an email saying they were hacked, right? Because they'd be a prime target for somebody trying to get passwords because they store them. So always try to protect your social security number and your personal information. That, you may be the last one in the world to fall for something where you're going to send money, but, if you get that form that looks legitimate and then you share your social security number, then, they can go out and be applying for credit, doing all kinds of things. And one thing to think about would be if you have a child who's, young child, nowhere close to being able to apply for anything. Sometimes they turn 18, go to apply for their first credit card and find out they have horrible credit because somebody got their social security number and had been, taking out debt when they were too young to do it. Never carry your social security card with you. Don't print your social security number or driver's license on your check, or driver's license number on your checks. Shred account statements and other sensitive information. And monitor your bills and financial accounts. Watch for missing monthly bills or statements. Review your monthly statements closely and contact a creditor if the bill does not arrive or mysterious charges appear. Understand, too, that you have a right to, once a year, get a free copy of your credit report. So that's something that you can get from all 3 major credit reporting agencies. Now, when you Google that, you're going to get ads at the top that try to get you to pay for that, or they're going to add services, say, well, we'll do credit monitoring for you, or those things. They're going to try to sell you something. But understand, if you go to annualcreditreport.com, once a year, you have the right to get a free copy of your credit report. They can't charge you for it. And you can look and see, is there any unusual activity on there, any accounts you don't recognize, things like that. And what do you do if you are a victim of exploitation? What if you do find something that's wrong? Call your bank or your credit card company. Cancel any debit or credit cards linked to a stolen account, and reset the PIN numbers and passwords. And again, you can get your free credit report once a year, but you can also get it if you have an issue. If you get that call from your credit card saying, are you currently in Geneva, Switzerland? And you say, no. And they shut down your account and, they say, okay, we'll reverse the charges. That gives you, even if you've already done it within a year, you can go back and get another credit report. And you can also consider a fraud alert on your credit report. It's something that lasts initially for 90 days and can be extended for all the way up to 7 years. So what that does is it adds an extra step to applying for credit of some type, where the businesses have to take more steps to verify your identity before they would process that issuing credit of some type. So tips for avoiding fraud would be, for spotting imposters, do online searches. If they identify themselves and they say, hey, this, that, or the other, even something you can do quickly if your phone or at your computer is to search for them. Don't believe your caller ID. Like I mentioned, just because it says 314-636 doesn't mean it is. Don't pay up front for a promise. And consider how you pay. If someone's telling you they want prepaid gift cards or something like that, that's certainly a warning sign. Talk to someone first. Reach out to someone. Hey, have you heard this? Do you know this person? Hang up on robocalls. Be skeptical about free trial offers. And do not deposit a check and wire the money back. That's another thing. That's what the lawyers fall for, is to say, well, okay, put the money in and then I'll send it back, or all these things. Wait a minute. And know who to contact. Reach out to those different agencies who, if they, a lot of times the benefit is, if this is happening to you or a loved one, it's happening to somebody else too. So they can point you to resources and help give you guidance on what to do about it.
Can you also just put a freeze on your credit?
Yeah.
So that nobody can access it unless you take the freeze off?
Yeah. But then I can't apply for that credit card and I get the free T-shirt. I don't want to do that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You can do that. And, that's the thing. And it kind of goes with the passwords too, is that balance between, we've got this convenience and we get so used to things, but then that just makes it easier for, to be at risk of exploitation. So you can absolutely do that and put, it's kind of, and that ties into all these things here, is the idea of what's the hurry? Let's slow things down a little bit. The idea that, you have to do a little more verification before you issue a loan is not a bad idea, things like that. So it's something, I hope you found this information to be useful. If you have any questions or any things that you need some help with, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to do anything I can. But like I say, hopefully this information will be helpful, as we all need to be on the lookout for this type of exploitation. Thank you.